This is a part 2 to the red-haired giants of ancient China found in the Tarim Basin. I was talking about how there'd be a lot more evidence if it wasn't for all the grave robbing going on. So some of these Caucasian mummies are buried in their boats in the Tarim Basin. You have to take into account there's no water around the Tarim Basin, right? It's a dry, arid desert, boarded off by the Himalayan mountains on one side. To get to this area is hard. You have to cross through a narrow corridor from between the mountains and then go south through a corridor of mountains to get into China. So they're buried in the boats, much like Nordic people customs. I think this is a testament to how strong their European lineage is. You know, you're talking about a group of people that live a completely different lifestyle now. There's no fishing, there's no boats. They're living in the desert, eating snakes. Yet, when they die, I believe what they're doing is they're building a boat from the very little wood you can find in the desert. There's no wood, yet they're getting enough wood to build a boat. Not for sailing, not for using for many years, just to bury themselves, right? That's a testament to their lineage. The fact that they're not from China. The oldest group of people found in China weren't exactly Chinese, right? If anything, they resemble more like Vikings. That's what Vikings did. They spent their time on boats. Imagine sitting in a boat for weeks on end, sailing across the world. They spent so much time rowing on boats that they had massive upper bodies, jacked shoulders, and barrel chests, which in itself, their genetics is a freak of nature. There's something going on there. I'll probably cover in later videos. I definitely will, the Vikings and their genetics. But they had jacked upper bodies, but they were such a seafaring people that their legs were scrawny. Their legs have completely atrophied. Right? There's a documentary on this where they found a mass burial site of Vikings, and they had weak legs, chicken legs like me. But their upper bodies were massive. They even had short legs and long arms. Right? This is phenotypes that are present in the Vikings, who also buried their dead in boats. You know, just like how the Mongols were horse people, right? They say a Mongolian child was born and then they put him on a horse, right? Every Mongol owns 2 horses, right? You have to, when one horse gets tired, they ride the other one. When they get hungry, they can eat one of them, right? They're horse people. They drink horse milk. You know, they eat fermented horse milk, cheese. And these red-haired giants of China were a seafaring people, even though that's not how they lived in China, right? But because they buried their dead in boats, we can assume that that's the culture that they descended from and still kept, you know, at least in their burial customs. The Jurchen man, and to me that almost sounds like the Chinese Jurchen, but I think this is something different. This is the Jurchen man, was red-haired. He was 2 meters tall. 2 meters tall. That's like 6'5", 6'6". A giant by ancient Chinese standards, at least. 2 meters tall, and he wore garments, trousers of European fashion. Now, I don't think trousers was too common at that time in China. At least definitely not the nobility. They wore like robes, almost like dresses, right? I think these trousers were more of a European thing. I'm sure the Chinese had trousers, but it wasn't common, not for the normal folk, for everyday life. And these trousers were European fashion, as we'll get to. Another pair of trousers were found beside him that was 400 years older than this Jurchen man. 400 years older than him. So they definitely didn't belong to him. That puts these trousers that were discovered over 3,000 years old. That's as old as the most ancient Chinese civilization, right? The start of the Chinese civilization around 3,000 years ago, roughly 1000 BC. These Indo-European people, that we assume they are, use these trousers to keep their legs warm while riding on horseback throughout the steppes. It can get very cold, right? It can get very hot, but very cold. Their clothing was of a tartan European fashion pattern, made of European sheep wool. So, they didn't just bring themselves over. This was an immigration of people. They brought their livestock, they brought their sheep. Maybe they were a nomadic people, right? Obviously, if you're traveling that far, you're living the nomadic life when you're traveling, at least. And living out in the desert, I can't imagine you aren't somehow nomadic in some way. At least the men are traveling from place to place. You're not just going to stay in one place and eat all the animals. It's a desert. There's barely any animals. You're going to have to go travel. Like I said, their clothing was of a European fashion, this tartan fashion. And when you look at it, the quilt work, it looks like, for lack of a better word, it's plaid. Plaid was in 3000 BC, right? It's always been in. The patterns also resemble the European Hallstatt culture of the Iron Age, Central Europe. I don't know much about that, but yeah. Caucasian face tattoos and face paint. So, on a lot of these Caucasian mummies we find in ancient China, they have face adornment, tattoos, and blue face paint. Much like, it makes me think of Braveheart. We had the Chinese Braveheart 3,000 years ago, the original Chinese Braveheart. Some of them could have been Scythian, as we ID their face tattoos. This is one female mummy with face tattoos that resemble that of the Scythian culture. So what do we know now? We know that even these Indo-Europeans, or whatever European lineages that came to China, even before China was China, they were mixing. History is, when you learn these things, it makes you have more questions, right? Because before I used to ask, what are the Chinese descended from, right? The lore and the myths say that we descended from the dragon. But now I know, in ancient China, some of the oldest people were giant Caucasians. That makes me wonder, where did these people come from? It's just questions on questions. A lot of these people had lung disease. Most of them had lung disease from breathing in all the sand in this harsh landscape. That's why people that live in sandy regions, they got the long eyelashes, they got a big nose to filter out the sand, to protect them from the sand. The men lived a harsh life, hunting and eating snakes, lizards, vultures, scorpions, I imagine. I'm adding that in there. You're in the desert, you're going to eat whatever you can or die. And badgers. They ate badgers. The Taklamakan deserts of western Xinjiang comes from an old Persian saying meaning the place of no return. Now, this is very interesting to me. So, these places where these Caucasoid mummies lived in ancient China, even before the Chinese, the name of this place, whether probably after these people settled there, derived from a Persian word, from ancient Persia, the empire. This is so interesting to me, you know? There has been so much exchange in ancient cultures back and forth. Whether the Persians been to China or not, they have these accounts. They knew of this place. And to present day in China, the name of this place comes from an old Persian word, you know? Because I know in that area of China, in the Xinjiang province, maybe due to more recent immigrations, there's a lot of Arabic cultures and, you know, a lot of Muslims. Maybe some of them are descended from Iran or descended from Persia, right? Because I know a lot of these Caucasian phenotypes, these Caucasian red-haired mummies, were wiped out by subsequent dynasties in China, right? It's pretty much genocide. They try to wipe a lot of them out, but not all of them, which is why in Xinjiang, to this day, you will see people with blue eyes, blonde hair or red hair, whether they have Arabic roots or not. Perhaps those are remnants of these Caucasoid mummies I'm talking about. So yeah, the Taklamakan deserts in Xinjiang comes from a Persian word saying the place of no return. You know, people knew this. It's hard to get into China. There's mountains surrounding that whole area. The Himalayan mountains, many people don't know it, but it goes up all the way up western China through countries like Afghanistan, you know. And to get to even northern China, you have to pass through mountains. And there's a tiny narrow corridor that actually brings you into southern China. So the way I imagine it is if you find your way into the desert, this Taklamakan desert, it might be hard to find your way out, or just not plausible, you know, in your lifetime. Once you're there, you're there. And if you want to immigrate out of there, maybe that's like a next generation thing. These deserts are 40 degrees Celsius in the summer and minus 20 in the winter. So we're talking about very harsh environments here. Very harsh environments for a very archaic group of people. Some of these mummies being over 2 feet tall compared to the Chinese at that time. What, you got 5'7", 5'8"? These guys are giants. And who knows, maybe this is a more watered down version of their genetics, because obviously they came from somewhere else. And maybe during that migration, they lost some of their genotypes, right? The genome got watered down, got diluted as they passed through Siberia, as they passed through Eastern Russia into China. And perhaps these are the remnants of an antediluvian culture after the fall of Atlantis, maybe 200,000 years ago, when Atlantis, you know, kind of disappeared from the face of the earth, this worldwide civilization. There were certain remnants of these people left. And they took some of their culture with them as the boats for burials. And that the Chinese civilization, after that, is just a result of humans slowly repopulating the earth. Technically, we're all antediluvian, right? Unless there's some sort of artificial intervention in our genetics after Atlantis. Technically, we are all Atlantean. We are all antediluvian. That'll be the conclusion for now for this two-part series on this giant white mummies of ancient China. The next two video series will be about China once again. I'm going to talk about the hybrid man, the video footage of him from pretty recent times. They're very interesting, very interesting. I'm going to go into all the phenotypes. That'll be a one whole thing, and then I'll talk about the giants that served in Chinese armies from back in the day. And these weren't like these weren't like the giants of the Potsdam army, right? Those are tall men. The Prussian army. These are way bigger. These guys were giants. But that will be another video. So thank you for listening, guys. Stay tuned.